There's this guy on YouTube. I saw him exploring this abandoned little town. It looked like a old west type of thing. I think it's in Illinois, and it's probably been abandoned maybe since 2015. I think it was a flea market, but it looked like an old west place. It was really cool. It got me thinking of back in the day, like the 90s, 80s, 90s. I was a child in the 80s, and well, I was born in 75, but anyway, this guy's going into these buildings and stuff was left behind in this place. It was weird because there were organs there, antique like stuff, VHS tapes. He goes into a place and there's all these VHS tapes left in this place. And he went there, it was in November, I think, when he posted this video. And it was just interesting. It got me thinking about back in the day when before streaming video, before the internet had really taken off, because I really don't remember the internet really. I don't remember until about 1998 that it got going. About that time is when AOL came out, and that's when people started getting in chat rooms and things like that. But before that, cell phones were barely a thing. Early 90s, they were not a thing, and there was just physical media. And if you grew up during that time, you forget in this time how much physical media really impacted everyone. Because, like, per se, I remember back early 90s, mid 90s, that time frame where even as a child in the 80s, video stores were a big deal. It was a hangout on the weekend. Like, if you were not going to a movie theater, if you were not going to the cinema to see a new release, then people on Friday and Saturday night were going into Blockbuster or into Hollywood Video or maybe to a mom and pop video store, and there would be a lot of people. They would be waiting for the new releases, maybe renting other stuff, and it's funny to remember back because a lot of times a new popular movie would come out of the movie theater, be released into the video stores, and everyone wanted that movie, and there'd be a wall full in Blockbuster of that one movie, but they would all be rented out a lot of times, and people would be in there waiting, hoping one of those movies would be returned. You might have a couple of people waiting at the desk, and they're hoping that someone drops that movie off so they can be the next to rent it. I even worked part-time in a Hollywood video store in the mid-90s. But now when I worked there, it was ridiculous because Hollywood Video back then, they would require you to wear this ridiculous full like suit. I guess because they were trying to outdo Blockbuster. I remember having to wear like dress pants, but they were like dress pants like you'd wear to a prom or something, and one of those white shirts you'd wear to like a prom and shit. I was working as a package handler in Memphis part time at FedEx, and then I was working. There was a time I worked part time also at Hollywood Video, but I remember having to wear that outfit. But besides that, working in a video store was pretty laid back. It was kind of cool. But you just think back to that time of how we didn't have the streaming services. So you just had your TV at home, you had the cable, you rented movies, you had the video game systems of that time, which what I'm thinking of right now is Sega Genesis, Super Nintendo, that era, the home systems, and the only way you were playing with anybody else was if your friends came over or you went to their house and you were playing together a two-player game, because of course that was before the time of headsets and talking to people around the world and playing with people anywhere. So there was that too. You just had to go everywhere to be around other people. There was not getting on the internet and just being able to talk and share all this stuff. or having to go out and actually get your physical media. So say you wanted to buy your physical media, the mall was a big deal. And gosh, I haven't been to the mall in ages, but years ago, of course, I was like everyone else. I wanted to go to the mall. I wanted to go to the big video stores and music stores in the mall because that's where all the new cool shit was. I wanted to buy, the latest movie like anyone else. For the longest time was on VHS or DVD. One of my favorite music stores, some of you may know if you live in the United States, was Katz. It was called Katz Music. That place, you always go in it, they'd be playing the latest rock songs or alternative stuff, and it always smelled like incense. And that's something I've always remembered. Finding a Katz music store or going to the mall, and I forget the name really of the one I used to go to in the mall a lot, or finding those random video stores or game stores or video and game stores. Because I was a gamer, I guess, to a certain degree back then. Nowadays, I'm not. I never really got past the PlayStation 2, so that really shows you how long I've been out of the gaming sphere. And that's probably just because there's a lot of money tied up in it. It takes so much time. There's just so many things we do in a day. You have to pick and choose what you want to do. So I tend to watch TV at times, or it's hard for me to even sit down and watch a whole movie. A lot of times I'll put in the movie, I'm eating, and I watch part of the movie, and I come back later and watch part of the movie, unless I'm actually going to the cinema to see a new movie. And then of course I'm paying for that, so I want to sit there. I even like to get there for the previews. I like to be on time for things like that. But then going back to that, to say the time of the 90s too, about the time that cell phones came along, I probably did not have my first cell phone until 1998 or 1999. And the first thing I had was like this fucking brick. It was a friend of mine, somebody I worked with at that time, gave me that. It was an extra phone they had. They got another phone. So that's the first thing I got, was this brick of a phone that I think it was like $10 cards you'd buy for it for 30 minutes. So, at first, a lot of people would get a cell phone, and that was just an emergency phone because it was a novelty at that point. It was just too expensive to use them all of the time, and all they literally did was dial. And like I said, they were like a brick, so it wasn't something you'd want to just carry around all the time because it'd be bulky in your pocket or whatever. You'd have to actually clip the damn thing on you. So that's what I did. I had that phone just like, oh, this would be cool if I break down or something like that. Because imagine, before any cell phones, if you broke down in your car or anything like that, the only thing you're going to be able to do is try to find a payphone. And that was just the norm. You didn't think nothing about it because that's just the way it was. I mean, of course, today we're so used to having our cell phones. I am too. Everyone is. It's hard to imagine. We use maps on it, all of that stuff for our directions. Everything's so convenient. It's a little computer with us. But back then, like, I can give you an instance. I remember in the 90s, like mid-90s, remember breaking down one time on the side of the interstate in Memphis. I had this 85 Cutlass Supreme. Can't remember what happened to it, but anyway, the car breaks down on the side of the interstate near an exit, one of the really bad parts of town where there's gang activity. And the only thing to do is to walk up to where the gas station is off that exit and try to call somebody to help me. And yeah, I could have got robbed or hurt or anything, but no one has cell phones. And basically I get up there to the payphone, and there was this older black gentleman that actually stayed with me. He wanted to make sure I was safe. He was a really nice man, and he had mentioned to me, "You are in a dangerous place. This is a dangerous place for you to be." And he stayed with me. He actually stayed with me until one of the guys that I was in the band with, one of my friends I actually lived with, came and was able to get me. But that's just how it was back then. If you broke down, you needed to be fortunate enough to be anywhere near a cell phone, or you were dependent on somebody, a policeman or somebody else that might stop and help you if they wasn't up to something of trying to harm you. But, of course, nobody really thought anything of it. So as cell phones went, I had that first cell phone, and then I still had a home phone. And on your home phone, it was typical to have just your voicemail, so people could leave that. And that's how people got a hold of you. They were getting a hold of you mostly through a home phone. Now, do I miss those days? Sometimes, because I wouldn't really, I would say, want to go back, but you get nostalgic about it sometimes because there were certain cool things about it. Like, there was, in some ways, the world was just different. It could be more peaceful as far as people not just being able to get a hold of you all of the time. Now, tonight I have my Elvis cup for my coffee. But anyway, people could not get a hold of you all of the time. And that was something I think back to where, say your employer wanted to call you into work. Well, you could always just say you wasn't home. You don't have to answer the phone. Nobody knows where you're really at. Nobody knows if you truly are at home or if you're out doing something. You would have had an answering machine. So say somebody wanted to get a hold of me and I wasn't at home, they sometimes called me at work. I worked in this grocery store when I was 17. Not that your employer liked when people call you at your job, but sometimes that happened. They would tolerate a couple of phone calls, and sometimes a friend might want to get a hold of you, see what you're doing after work or whatever, or see where you're going to hang out, that sort of thing. So you couldn't get on the internet and make plans with people. You couldn't text anybody. You couldn't email anybody, and phone calls were it, and you had to catch people at home or call them at their job. That sort of thing. So a lot of things that I miss from that time would have been how things were a little more peaceful without all the technology at times, and how social you had to be. You couldn't just hide in a cocoon. You had to go out and do things, and sometimes there was a certain charm in that, though I do like to be alone a lot today, I admit that. But back then, there was a lot more exploration, like, say, on the weekend, trying to find out what everybody's doing, showing up. You would just maybe, like, not have a plan. You're off work, it's a Friday or Saturday night, you're going to go show up at your friend's house. You're just going to go over there and see if they're home. You're going to go knock on the door and see if they're home. That's just how things worked back then. It would happen to me too. Someone would come over to where I was at, see if I'm home. And everybody just starts getting together like that. People are going to each other's houses. And it was just a normal thing to do. Today, I don't think it's looked at as so normal because everybody expects you to text them or call them. You're not just going to show up at their place. But back then, a lot of times you just be out driving around and you just go by so-and-so's house or go by their place. Or we knew where each other worked. You know where your friends are working, so you're going to show up there after work. And that happened at the grocery store I worked at. That's how I met the rhythm guitar player I played in the band with. We worked as sack guys, sack boys, whatever you want to say, at the grocery store. And a lot of us all knew each other. We knew other people from other places around town. This was in Memphis. And we would all get together after some of us got off work. Others would just meet up out in the parking lot of this place on the weekend. It was like a hangout. We'd hang out on the other side of this parking lot. A lot of times we just sat out there and shoot the shit And eventually we'd all decide on going somewhere else. We go to someone else's house, or there was going to be some get together, or there might be a little gathering or a little party, whatever the case may be. And we're just driving around, going around, hanging out. That was the kind of stuff that you would do, and end up from that parking lot at someone else's place. And it just, these things just all happened organically. There was usually not some solid game plan. Like when I was in the band with the guys, and me and the drummer lived in this little house in this neighborhood, a lot of times we decide, like the day of, on a Friday or Saturday, we're going to have a party and we're going to play here. We had our stuff set up in the living room in this house. We're just going to start calling people, and word of mouth will spread, and we're going to have a little party here at the house. Now, that's how it happened. We start calling people the day of, and we'd say, hey, there's a party here. Here's the address. We knew a couple of people. Spread the word to a few other people who you know. Next thing you know, here's 20, 30 people, I guess, showing up to this little house or whatever. Some we know, some we don't know. There was one party we opened the gate to our backyard and had people parking in the backyard, people parking down the side of the road. So it was weird how that would happen, but it was literally for making a couple of phone calls saying there's a party at such and such house. Come on over. We're going to play live music and have some beers. You can bring your own too, and we're all just going to hang out and have a good time. And that would happen a lot of times. And some people would stay the night. We'd wake up, everybody's sleeping in the couch, the floor, wherever. Those were good times. It was like some of the stuff you'd see in these teenage party movies, where everybody wakes up hungover and whatever from a party. So we used to do stuff like that. And we moved over to a bigger house where the whole band lived together. And my girlfriend lived there, and the drummer's girlfriend lived there. Like 6 of us lived in one big 2-story house on like an acre or more of land. And we used to do the same thing. We had band equipment down in the garage. The garage would open out onto a big carport, and we'd have a party. Now, at the little house, the cops would get called sometimes, and we get a noise ordinance ticket. And then over at the bigger house, because it was back away from the neighborhood, it was on the land, one time the cops were called, and we were like a quarter of a mile from the main neighborhood. One time the cops came down there, and they just hung out for a little bit. They were cool. They was like, I don't know why anybody called on you guys. You guys are well away from the neighborhood. You guys have a good night. They hung out a little bit. They were cool, and then they just let us be. And even the ones that came over to the little house in the neighborhood, they were not usually happy to be there, but they give us a ticket and tell us to stop and leave. So it was all good. But let's say I was talking about cell phones, around 1999, I guess, a year after I had that brick, I got another type of phone. That's when phones started becoming you start seeing more people carrying them. I had this Nokia. That was a common phone back then. And it was a little smaller than the brick phone I had. But all it did, too, was dialed. It did the same thing. It just dialed out. There was no texting still. Everybody just had the cell phones that dialed out. Cell phones were still expensive, but they were becoming more common. And most people did clip them onto their pocket or the side of their jeans or whatever. When they first were becoming a thing, people didn't just really carry them in their pockets and things like that. They were more clipped on, and I guess because they were bigger. So they were still expensive though. So I mean, you would use them more, but it was kind of like during the week you could have free minutes. You could get some plans where you'd have free minutes from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. But after 7 p.m., or no, I take that back. From 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., it would use your minutes. And you only had so many minutes per month. And if you went over those minutes, they would charge you so much a minute on top of whatever your regular bill was. It could get very expensive. But after 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., you had free time. at night you could use your phone freely. And then on the weekend, you had that from like 7 p.m. Friday night to 7 a.m. Monday morning. It was like that for a lot of people's plans, where you had the weekend to use it without having to worry about your going over minutes or things like that. But the plans were still kind of expensive for cell phones, just like they were for a home phone. And it's not like today where it's gotten cheaper. And back when you had home phones, long distance costed a lot too. So when cell phones first come out, it was still kind of expensive, and not everybody still had them. But the thing about cell phones, as it went on, what I don't like about it, one of the things I grew to not like about it is how, well, for one, people could get a hold of you all the time. Well, I mean, you still could choose not to answer the phone and things like that, but your employers, employers started to get entitled. I've had fights with a couple of employers, arguments before over this, where employers started to become entitled, thinking, well, you have a cell phone, so you need to answer the phone. I know you have a cell phone, so that means you got a phone on you. You better answer and come in when I call you in. And I'm like, no, you don't own me. I mean, I've known, it's one of the many issues I've had with workplaces over the years, where I've known so many people that kiss workplaces' asses to the 9th, 10th degree. I'm sure some of you guys know people like that too, that kiss workplaces' asses no matter what they do to them or how they abuse them. But this, to me, is an abusive tactic. I still think today that is an abusive tactic, to think you, for an employer to think they own you and they can call you in any damn time they please. I don't play that game. If I'm scheduled a time, that's what I'm scheduled. If you call me and I don't answer, well, I just don't answer. And it's just the way it is. But that's one of the things I don't like about cell phones. Now, the internet, when that started, also, like cell phones, extremely expensive. And again, it was a novelty at first. Not everybody was going to have it. I knew a couple of people that had it. And at first, a couple of my friends that had it, I would get on their computers. And that's the only way you got on it at first, was on a desktop computer with a giant tower like modem. And it was dial-up, and the dial-up took a while. So it wasn't like, at first there was no YouTube or any of that anyway, but if you were going to try to stream any kind of video, you could forget it, because at first there was just the dial-up, and to try to stream something, I mean, it'd take all night if you were trying to buffer something to just stream a simple 30 seconds or something. It could take forever. So you had that dial-up that made that noise, like you've probably heard it before, like that buzzing noise and screeching noise, and eventually it would connect. But what it was cool for was, that's where online dating pretty much started, or chat rooms pretty much started. And I did get into those some, and I did meet, I'd say I met at least, I talked to a lot of different people, but I met at least one girlfriend that I had off of the AOL chat. But it was very primitive, but at the time it seemed pretty cool. But what you would do is, the big cities had chat rooms, and you could go into those. Memphis had one. Some of the cities like New York or Chicago had 2 or 3 chat rooms, because so many people would go into them, especially on the weekend. But it was really primitive. You just see somebody's screen name, you'd see everybody scrolling and saying stuff in the chat. And if you wanted to talk to somebody further or get to know them further, you would need to pass your email to them in the chat, which means anybody could get the email. But that's what people would do. They would send out their email and say, I want, hey, here's my email so and so there in the chat, email me, and you could trade pictures that way. Now think of this too, you wasn't taking pictures with your cell phone camera because that didn't exist yet. You were still going to have to take a picture with a regular camera, and there were still film cameras back then, and they had just started getting into digital cameras in the late 90s. But either way, you were going to have a developed picture, and you were going to have to scan it. At first, you would scan the picture. You need a printer or scan. Well, you need a scanner. Yeah, you actually needed a scanner so you could scan the picture into the computer, and then that's how you're going to send that picture over. So we wasn't nowhere near a point yet of just being able to take a quick selfie, being able to really look at the picture, or you know how we all like to take a lot of pictures sometimes to see what the best picture is. I know, I've done it too. You know, you want to get the right lighting, you want to get a good you want to get the right angle, all this stuff. We can do that easier with our own cell phones now, but back then, scanning a picture. And then when we started using the chips in the cameras, well, it was a little easier because you could put the chip into the computer and then all the files come right up instead of having to scan it in. But still, to take good pictures, you were using a regular camera for the longest time. And I remember doing this when I first really got on online media a lot on MySpace. I had a laptop. I would stage my pictures I did for MySpace with a regular camera. I had a decent camera. It had a chip. I could go I would stage the camera like you would your phone, do the selfies, set the timer on the camera, you know, until you got the pictures you wanted. And then put the chip in the laptop and upload the files. And I remember doing that for MySpace. So it's interesting to think how far we've come, and we've really come a long way in a short time. You know, really, if you just estimate it from 2000 to now, well, I'd say, let's say about 27, 28 years anyway, from what I can remember with this technology, where it started, where I remember it starting around, I'd say 1998, where I really saw it starting to come into play, to now. It's just advanced by leaps and bounds, where here I am right here on my phone, able to talk to anyone that wants to watch across the world. Now, these are the things, of course, like a lot of people, I do like about the internet. You couldn't do this back in the 90s, you know? You couldn't do this sort of thing where it wasn't until 2005 YouTube came out, and even then, the first YouTubers, they had a job with being the first YouTubers, because, I mean, they were using the old cameras, the old video cameras, to be able to do their videos. They'd have to set those up, and then they'd have to download that into their, I would say, well, they could have had a laptop at that time. They'd have to download that onto the laptop, because the phones still were too primitive in 2005. You had the flip phones around that time. And that's when text really first started. You still didn't have cameras worth a damn on the cell phone. So they would have been using video cameras, downloading the video information into the laptop. And then if you go back and watch people from that era, you can see, especially if you watch any of those videos from YouTubers back then on a high-def TV now, how primitive it was. But there would have been a lot more work, and it took a lot more upload time to be able to, for those people back then on YouTube, the pioneers, you could say, to put up a video. So you just think about how far it's came, and it's amazing. Now you have it went into all this online dating. It went into everyone being able to talk across the world. It went into everybody being able to play video games with each other anywhere in the world, for us to share and talk to people. That's the biggest thing too, being able to talk to people anywhere, where back in the 80s and 90s, you didn't even think about people in the rest of the world, really. I mean, you knew the rest of the world existed, but your socializing would have been just confined to your locality. It would have been just confined to your local area, because anything you knew about the rest of the world is likely something you were seeing on TV, on cable, on movies. And it was kind of more of a novelty, unless you had the money to go on a vacation and you were going to travel to Europe or somewhere else in the world and go see it, which people did if they had that kind of money or were able to go on a school trip or whatever. But for the most part, you were just socializing with your local people you worked with, went to school with, and that sort of thing. And I admit, it affected me too, because that's how I met my ex-girlfriend and went to Sweden. It was from being online. It was being able to get on the internet. So it's amazing how we can do all of that. Now, the bad of it today, I would just say that, and I don't socialize much. I was just going to say people don't socialize as much. I have different reasons why I don't socialize as much, and I've discussed some of that before. My depression, a lot of the stuff I've been through, a lot of the darkness I've gone through, it's made me want to be isolated. But I guess what I'm going to say is, a lot of people, I feel like, that have grown up just with the technology, the younger generation, especially the youngest generations coming up with just this technology, I think it's caused, not all of them, a lot of them, to not be as social, just simply because there's so much distraction with all the video games, with all the stuff you can do online, with being able to have all this right at your fingertips that we used to not have. I do think it probably has a lot of kids growing up that don't go outside and do anything anymore. It probably does have a lot of issues like that. There probably are situations where people don't develop any social skills. So, I mean, but it's like anything. There's just good and bad. There's online dating that goes horribly wrong. But at the same time, how many people before the days of online dating still had horrible relationships? I don't know if that's really that much of an issue. I mean, they say, people have hurt other people from, and there's been people that have ended up in horrible, like domestic violence and all that from online dating. But all that was I don't know, because all of that was, it happens, but all of that was also going on before online dating. And I guess what I'm going to say is, there's just good and bad. As I've stated that before, there's good and bad in everything. There's light and dark in everything. There's good that comes from technology, bad that comes from technology. And I guess it's all in how you use it. So anyway, I just thought, I'd seen that video on YouTube. I was like, let's talk about a little bit back in the day of things that I remember experiencing before the technology, and just kind of how I saw it evolve. But anyway, I guess I'll talk to you guys later on.